Pagalagitsi, Ugalami, Fairbanksmi, Anna Noranga, Pangwapak, Ano Noranga, Korinami, Iñupiaq-Athabascan Olak, Canuck-Shinaga Rhonda Anderson, Shavaktunga Commissioner on Indian Affairs Me. Good morning and welcome to 400 Years, the Truth and Healing for the Next 7 Generations. My name is Rhonda Anderson and I will be your host today. I am speaking to you from traditional homelands of the Sokoke Abenaki and the Pecumtuck here in Northeast Coleraine, Massachusetts. Please feel free to drop where you're listening from, where you're tuning in from. What Indigenous lands are you occupying and tuning in from right now? So Kuleana to Interfaith Opportunities Network for hosting and providing space for today's event so that we can be here to safely lift and center Indigenous voices. I am so honored to be here and very excited to hear from the truly amazing individuals that we have lined up for you today. So we have different parts to this presentation, and in protocol, traditional protocol, I would like to have opening words and song that is traditional to this area. So I'm very honored to introduce someone who's my brother, Larry Spotted Crow Mann. I have known Larry for over 25 years now. And like I said, he's truly like my older brother. We work together as co-directors at Ohketeau Cultural Center and the Native Youth Empowerment Foundation. Larry is a citizen of the Nipmuc tribe in Massachusetts, and he's a nationally acclaimed author. Larry is a cultural educator, traditional storyteller, and boy, does he tell stories, tribal drummer, and motivational speaker regarding youth sobriety, cultural, and environmental awareness. So Larry will be opening up this event in his language and song according to our traditional protocols and respects. Take it away, Larry.
About it, Miss Rhonda. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. With the Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you all today from traditional Nipmuc lands. I'm coming to you live from just southwest of Wabakwasit in the Quinnebog watershed. And it's a real honor to be a part of this endeavor today to display our culture, our people, and what our needs are and how everybody else can get involved. But as Rhonda said, the most important thing I can do right now is open up in our traditional way and speak the language of these trees here behind me and the birds and the sky and all the things around in this traditional Nipmuc land, the words that have been spoken here for thousands of years. And so we say in our language, "Wu nasha natuma manatu, tabatni, watu chikinnisin, okumis, tabatni wachi sapausu, masakati huanat, notas ninama menantiok, kinuta yu pantaminok, and a male ninawama quantam kichia, ka mata wanantam, ka nagutie kokutam ninawa, manatu, masakati huanat, womanetio, ka nosoko musu amoke, ninaho kankantu chokesich. Yayu. I greet you in the Nipmuc words of peace, reciprocity, and understanding. And in those words, I ask that our relatives relatives of everybody to come and share this time with us, and that we would leave these few hours that we'll share together with a better understanding and a better way to communicate and a better way to share the joys that we have, and also help shoulder some of those pains that each of us have to bring that together and heal us all. And with that healing, I want to open up with this Nipmuc healing song I would share, because as we are taught, the drum is the heartbeat of the land. Yeah, da, 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 oh. Menato needs Kehueo Nina one O Jessica Niam Ka Eyuti Eyo Ayute Yo Aquani Emenawa Nina wanti andam, Nina wanti andam, way yo hey yo hey ya, way yo hey yo hey ya, way ha, way ha, way ha. Ya da Ka e yu ti e yo, pa yu te yo, a kwa ni e ne na wa. Ni na wan ti an tam, ni na wan ti an tam. Hey yo, hey yo, hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey ya, we ha, hey ha. Ya ra 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 ho. Manato Nitske Hueyo Ninawan Ochesikaniam Ka eyuti eyo Payuteyo Akwani Enenawa Nina wanti antam, Nina wanti antam. Way yo hey yo hey ya, way yo hey yo hey ya, way ha hey ha. Ucha, kutabadamish, nipiam, ka kutabadamish. Thank you. Back to you, Rhonda.
Thank you so much, Larry. Every time you play that song, I start really getting down, you know. I love it. Thank you so much. Another important protocol of respect is in acknowledging the land that we're on. So I am pleased to introduce David Brule, Nolumbeka project president, and who is of Narragansett and Nehantic descent. He is the coordinator of the National Park Service Battlefield Protection Program. That program's goal is to identify the likely locations of King Philip's War of 1675 to 76. Peskiamscut battlefield is probably right near where David will be speaking, which is beside the Connecticut River in Unity Park in Turners Falls. So please, if you could take that away, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Welcome to the heart of the Pecumtuck homelands. This place at the falls has been a place of peace for the last 10,000 years at least. The Pecumtuck welcomed all who came in peace here to this place of safety.
Can you hear me?
Warnoko, Agawam.
Are we going to be watching David Brule?
Wampanoag, and Narragansett, among many nations, came here to this spot to fish, to renew kinship ties, to plant, to perform ceremony, to find a spouse. For some, it was a destination and a pilgrimage. Many came here from the distant valleys of the Hudson, the Ohio, and beyond to live out the last of their days here on a spiritual journey in this place. Some were caught here in an unexpected and violent death in 1676. Their spirits have been trapped here in their moment of greatest torment. Through actions such as those we are accomplishing today, we carry on the efforts began at the reconciliation ceremony of 2004 between the Narragansett Indian tribe and the town of Montague through the diplomatic efforts of Wisitinuag Nolumbeka project. That day, the hatchet of war was literally buried on this spot by the Narragansett medicine man, Lloyd Running Wolf. We are, and you are, aiding in restoring the balance to this place and helping release those tormented spirits to continue their journey to the house of the Creator, Kotantuwit Manitou. Every time we gather here or elsewhere, we must acknowledge the fact that we are standing on indigenous land. Our prayer of thankfulness. We give thanks to the sun every morning, to the four directions and the four winds, to all living creatures. They are kinfolk and ancestors. To the woodlands and the rivers that sustain us, the Pagwag, the Wanasiatok, the Pokomegon, Pokompetuk, and the mighty Quinatuk. We give thanks to the hills and the plains who are part of us as we are of them. We give thanks to the last 7 generations and the next 7 generations, to our ancestors who have guided us over the generations and who are here with us now. We give thanks for all good things. Taubotan, Tamuk, Wuche, Wame, Akwene.
Next, we have Sister Clare Carter of the New England Peace Pagoda. She is an ordained as a nun, assuming...
Rhonda, can you speak again? I think maybe it's unmuted. Thank you so much.
Oh, you want me to start from the very... Okay, thank you so much, David. That was beautiful. And I would like everyone to think about this. Through the education systems, we have learned the 3 ships that Columbus sailed with better than the indigenous peoples from the land that we are standing on. So thank you very much for that land acknowledgement. Next, we have Sister Clare Carter of the New England Peace Pagoda. She is ordained as a nun, assuming her order's vows of healing the world of materialism and violence through the spiritual practices of chanting, prayer, and constructing peace pagodas and her pilgrimages. She has participated in multiple pilgrimages for peace and justice, both locally and internationally, to witness suffering and inspiring transformation. Sister Clare will be leading us in chant and a call to justice. Thank you.
Thank you. A chilling image, a sword over an indigenous man's head, the motto, "We seek peace by the sword, but peace only under liberty." This long-held seal and motto of Massachusetts tells us the truth of the foundation of Massachusetts and the foundation of this country. Until recently, it has served as a force that so many of us unwittingly went along with, a force to keep in place the right of violent colonization underpinned by the false notion of white supremacy and the supremacy of Western civilization over the indigenous civilization. The liberty spoken of was the liberty violently enforced by the settlers to do what they wished on these lands which were nurtured in sacred relationship for over 10,000 years by the indigenous peoples. We have to say how grateful we are to our elected political representatives and our community activists who have taken up the cause to pass legislation which will create a commission involving indigenous people to make a new seal and a new motto. If we look at the history, starting 400 years ago, we understand that the great sachem Massasoit Usamiquin did allow the travelers on the Mayflower to live. He saw families. He saw people weakened with hunger. With circumspection and spiritual authority granted by his people, Massasoit met with Mayflower representatives to reach a common understanding of mutual coexistence, a treaty of peace, of mutual benefit and protection. Massasoit was practicing the ancient and strong spiritual ways of his ancestors. The life of his people had been supported by these ways for more than 10,000 years. They were the ways of sacred relationship among people and within the wondrous web of life, and they were good and true. Although the fledgling relationship which began between the two cultures, indigenous and European, held originally some promise, the drive for land ownership and political dominance soon took over as hundreds and then thousands from England came to these shores. Quote, peace by the sword and only under liberty. The sword was the guns that the people brought, and the imposition of political forms of brutal power, artificially imposed. The liberty, again, was the false and lethal notion of privilege and superiority of Europeans. The history of colonization is a dreadful lesson in the consequence of greed, of militarism, and racism. The near total loss of lands and life, the near total loss of language, the near total shattering of tribal ways, the nightmare of colonization of what came to be called New England. Essentially, the break between the two peoples really was about materialistic thinking and spiritually based civilization. It may seem that the materially based thinking has triumphed as we look around, but in truth, the spiritually based civilization is showing that it is the way of life itself. It has been held by indigenous people through the long nightmare at incalculable cost, but it is still the way of the indigenous peoples. The future we have to create together will be a spiritually based way of thinking and living, with all religions contributing the highest and truest teachings from their faith for the good of all. This 3-day walk has been initiated and organized by Interfaith Opportunities Network. The organizers and members of ION are to be deeply thanked for their visionary commitment, seeding a true understanding of this history and our common responsibility to work for transformation and healing. Built into their initiative is the path of repairing, of giving back, of reparation. We are so grateful to ION. On this walk, the churches and synagogues have welcomed us. They have embraced the purpose of this walk. It is helping to sow the seeds of deep change of consciousness in this region and beyond. Just as the colonization of New England set the patterns of colonization of Turtle Island, may our seemingly small-scale efforts help in a nationwide awakening to transform this long nightmare of colonization, of militarism, and of racism to a common future which cherishes all that is living as sacred. Namu myo rande kyo. Namu myo rande 나무묘는 내교.
Thank you, Sister Claire. That's beautiful. I appreciate your words and your thoughts, and being next to the river is just so amazing. Thank you. Now we have come to Speaking Truth portion of our event. So let me go to the next person who's up, who is also speaking to truth, and that is Reverend Kelly Gallagher, who is the Associate Conference Minister to Southern New England UCC Justice and Witness Ministries. Reverend Gallagher will expand on the European Christian belief in a God-given right to conquer, enslave, and kill Indigenous peoples. That's a pretty heavy topic, and thank you so much for speaking to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, and all the organizers of today's event. I'm honored to be with all of you on this day. I stand in what is today called Northampton, the land of the Nipmuc and the Pecumtuck people. I am here 2 generations on my father's side and 5 generations on my mother's side from European ancestors of Irish descent. I come also as a spiritual descendant of the framers of the Doctrine of Discovery, as well as the Pilgrim and Puritan communities who took this land as their own in the name of their Christian institution and with the blessings and the belief of the Doctrine of Discovery. I acknowledge, and I call all who have settled and colonized this land to acknowledge that in the last 400 years, and for hundreds of years before the landing of the Pilgrims, that a driving force behind the colonization, devastation, and genocide of the original peoples of this land was and continues to be the institutional Christian church, its doctrines, and its core beliefs. When the passengers on the Mayflower arrived on these shores, they sought not only religious freedom, but also enterprise and control. They were inheritors of generations of story that this land was uninhabited and uncivilized, was here for the taking, was in fact waiting to be colonized by Christians. With the arrogance of a religion that sought to dominate in the name of their God, the Pilgrims came believing in their own superiority over even the strangers on the ship with them, and especially the native peoples they encountered upon arrival. It was a foundation of their belief, the Great Commission, as it is known in the Christian world, to make disciples of all nations, modified by the Roman Empire first and solidified through the Doctrine of Discovery to do so by whatever means necessary. If they are not with us, they are against us. And the Doctrine of Discovery gave Christians the mandate to take, in the name of Christ, lands and people. The Doctrine of Discovery is a 16th century papal bull, an edict from the Pope, giving Christians the divine right to conquer the world in the name of the church. This was the force that launched Columbus and the conquistadors, and though the Pilgrims and the Puritans who followed close behind would claim that they had eschewed the Roman Church, they retained much of the core values that allowed for the behavior of the Europeans when they first arrived, and to this day. The dehumanizing, removal, and genocide of the indigenous communities by people who called themselves Christian laid the groundwork in the very fabric of this society for the Trail of Tears, for slavery, for Jim Crow, for alienation, oppression, and continued genocide of people of color in this nation to this day. In the words of the Reverend Dr. William Barber, it is this nation's original sin. The Doctrine of Discovery was introduced into US law in 1823 and used as recently as 2005 by our own dear Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to justify the taking of land and rights from the Oneida Nation. The church-based doctrine was replaced by the philosophical concept of manifest destiny, introduced in 1845 as the idea that the United States is destined by God to expand across the entire North American continent, spreading democracy and capitalism. This image, which is an image called American Progress, painted in 1872, here it is, represents the ideas of manifest destiny, replacing and yet reflecting Christian imagery with that of Roman. It is, in essence, secularized the core Christian beliefs brought here in the Doctrine of Discovery, as indigenous communities and nature and the buffalo are pushed into oblivion by technology, capitalism, and Europeans. It is paramount that we understand why we believe it has always been okay to behave this way. The foundations come from the institutional Christian church. In Massachusetts alone, 83% of our cities and towns were established prior to 1833. And what this means was that in order to exist, in order to take that land from whoever was here, to claim it as a township for Europeans, in order to do that, the town must have a church and a minister. 83% of our cities and towns were given the blessing and sometimes a mandate of the church to push out those who were already living here and to further remove the original inhabitants in the name of the church. The state religion of Massachusetts was not disestablished until 1833. When a religion and a culture are so intertwined, the faith is lost. The guiding values and morals meant to temper human greed and arrogance are subsumed by the desire of the institution and the powers that be. It was one reason why the framers of the Constitution did not want a state religion, but they were unable to see how they merely secularized the flawed morals of the institutional Christian church when they envisioned their new world. A new world shaped and formed to serve them, primarily white, male, land-owning people of European descent, and all those willing to defend and resource this construct. But all is not lost. I want to posit that what has been skewed is human interpretation, institutionalization, and secularization of the faith. Any attempt anywhere to bend a divine knowledge toward the worldly benefit of any one community results in corrupt moral and ethical doctrine. When Christianity became the state religion way back in 313 with Constantine, it then became a tool to conquer. The institution, like many institutions before and since, claimed divine power and authority for its decisions and oppression. The skewed values and ethics have hung in there because they benefit those in power. They serve the conquerors, the settlers, and now the dominant culture, white supremacy. The idea that God wants Christians who are operating from an institutional place of superiority and arrogance to take over and rule is completely anathema to the teachings of the New Testament. And yet we never seem to have a problem figuring out how to skew those words. But the good news is that we have the capacity and the teachings to behave differently. We have a faith that teaches us humility, repentance, relationship, and community. As Sister Clare said, we have the people to bring a spiritual vision. We have a set of core values and ethics that can be called upon to overcome the self-serving, power-seeking, dominating values we have claimed and perpetuated for so long. We have models of people who have disavowed the dominating doctrines and values, lifted up the faith and theologies of servicehood and empowerment of all the people. The time has come and is long past to hold up the faith that is truly at the core of Jesus's teachings, a faith of walking with instead of over, a faith of inclusion instead of exclusion, a faith that calls us to repent and repair and seek a way forward. Native American theologian Vine Deloria, in his foundational text, God is Red, writes, Christianity itself may find the strength to survive if it honestly faced the necessity to surrender its narrow interpretation of history and embark on a determined search for the true meaning of human life on this planet. It is time for those who would call themselves followers of Jesus to claim the faith that will acknowledge the past, consider its impact on who we are now, and seek to take steps toward truth and conciliation, in the words of Mark Charles. As a Christian church, we can leverage the power we have toward a turn. We can offer a new lens for this country to really see itself. But first, we need to adjust our own lens and see the world anew. And a first step in this day, at this time, would be to support the communities around us. The organizers and esteemed speakers today have chosen 4 organizations that are seeking to hold up and center the voice of Indigenous communities. I invite you to consider donating to any of these organizations as a beginning step. And while doing so, learn about them. We will hear more during this time, but also they have wonderful Facebook pages and websites. You'll have opportunities to see links to them. And I believe that even in the chat box now or soon, a link of how to donate. And on the YouTube bio link below this screen, the organizations are the Native Land Conservancy, the Ohketeau Cultural Center, Nipmuc Cultural Preservation, and Northeast Farmers of Colored Land Trust. Organizations where we can begin repairing relationship and learning truth. The Hebrew word for repentance is teshuvah. It means to turn back toward what is right and good, toward where God is calling us. Let us begin now, today, seeking truth first, so that healing might happen. I call upon the Christian church to acknowledge its role, and upon this nation to acknowledge its belief in its own divine power to oppress and retain power over others. From there, we can begin to move forward into repentance, turning toward a new way for the next 7 generations. May it be so. Blessed be. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Gallagher. That was beautiful and so truthful, how we need to be humble and have reciprocal relationships with Indigenous tribes so that we can begin some sort of truth and reconciliation. Thank you so much for your beautiful words.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, speaking truth, portion of our event, we have Jim Peters, and he's back with us. And Jim will discuss the 400-year Wampanoag experience under European colonization. Take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate the Reverend's words. It was very enlightening, you know. And I'd just like to begin. Like to offer greetings and thanks and good day to all our friends and aliens, allies of Connecticut River Valley, Uncle Katashani, Sister Clare, and Friends of the Peace Pagoda. Much thanks to the Interfaith Council in Nolumbeka for providing us with this opportunity to offer a perspective on our shared history over the past 400 years. As said, I'm Jim Peters, Mashpee Wampanoag. And while I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs and on the the Governor's Plymouth 400 Commission, for topics such as these, I can always speak as a Mashpee Wampanoag. You see, it's kind of personal to me, born and raised in Mashpee, Being nurtured by a traditional tribal community during a time when we were the only ones there, I was bonded. It's in my blood, and I'm of the land. We are people of the first light, first contact, keepers of the Eastern Gate. We have experienced maybe 100 years of visits from across the Great Pond, explorers, fishermen, military types. Some were pleasant and informative, others horrific, killings and kidnappings. Many were taken, few returned. We noticed a difference when the Mayflower came to our shores. They came with their women and children. It is apparent they came to stay. It is said that they came to escape religious persecution, something we found they had no qualms with sharing. That before they came, they signed the Mayflower Compact, the first body politic in this new world, professing their loyalty to their king and to commit to their charter of establishing a first colony in the northern area of Virginia. The charter provided incentives and liberties to conquer this land, consistent with the Christian Doctrine of Discovery. Whereas there were no Christian sovereigns, they had the right to take and enslave the non-humans of this land. To me, it's almost as if we've gone full circle. As the US and UK commemorate 400 years of the Mayflower landing on these shores and establishing arguably the first permanent colony in the New World, we are currently immersed in a global pandemic, and your economies are being challenged. That about 406 years ago, the Wampanoag people were devastated by a European pandemic, where up to 90% of our people perished. The Plymouth colony was established at a place known as Patuxet, where the people were wiped out by the disease. That our Massasoit Usamequin, who had once commanded several thousand warriors, was relegated to several hundred. His domain on the northern end of Narragansett Bay was challenged by his nemesis, Canonicus, the Narragansett sachem of the bay, whose people escaped the perils of the pandemic. Tisquantum, a citizen of Patuxet was kidnapped before the pandemic and taken to Spain, where he found sanctuary with Jesuits, and then to England, where he found passage home, only to find his community perished. Usamequin summoned him to council to gain knowledge of his journey. One can only surmise how he described the hero's military might and propensity to war. Usamequin took 90 warriors to Plymouth Colony, along with 5 deer and some waterfowl, to hold what America considers the first Thanksgiving. Apparently, they both had common concerns. The Pilgrims were scared to death of the wilderness and all the inhabitants, and Usamequin had his issues with Canonicus. It appears that Tisquantum negotiated the first treaty of the New World, one of mutual protection. Our Massasoit lived by the principle, my word is my honor. And that honor was upheld by his people, and in this case, 50 years of forbearance with the colony until his death. In the meantime, some 30,000 colonists had immigrated to Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies, and they became well entrenched in this new world. It has been said that there were rumors during Usamequin's funeral of an uprising to drive them back to the sea. A praying Indian, John Sassaman, committed a treasonous act by informing the colony of such talk. Wamsuta, the successor as Massasoit, was summoned to the colony to pledge his allegiance to their authority. We can only assume that the discussions were not going well, as Wamsuta became ill and died, suspected of being poisoned. Metacomet, the second son of Usamequin, was raised as a Massasoit. He was called King Philip by the colonists. He was also summoned to the colony to pledge his allegiance, and as I understand, he reluctantly submitted to protect his people. During the ensuing winter, John Sassaman was found under the ice, and consequently, 2 of Metacomet's lieutenants were accused, tried, and executed by the colony with no conclusive evidence. The acts of the colony were beyond their authority, and King Philip's War was declared. It lasted between 1675 and 1678. Many native bands experienced the treachery of the colonists and did not want to participate. There are a number of praying Indians who found themselves compromised, and their alliance with the colony led to King Philip's capture and execution. His head was displayed on a pike in the town square in Plymouth for 27 years. To date, it's considered the bloodiest war per capita that has transpired on this soil, now called America. During and after the King Philip's War, colonial retaliation against the native survivors was brutal. Villages surrendered, and many were boarded on ships and sent to parts unknown. The native praying Indians were chained and taken to Deer Island in Boston Harbor in October with no provisions or shelter to withstand the coming harsh winter. Many died. Each year, descendants of the survivors continue to commemorate this egregious, unjust retaliation with a spiritual paddle from Watertown to Deer Island. The Boston Harbor and other remote islands became commonplace for native incarceration. The Massachusetts Punkapog, whose plantation is now Canton, and other Indians, Christian or otherwise, met a similar fate. The Hassamisset Nipmucs, isolated on their 7,500-acre plantation, what is now Grafton, were assigned an overseer who began selling off the land to pay for his services. There were complaints, and 40 years after the war, the Great and General Court allotted land to each of the 7 surviving Nipmuc families, in total 500 acres, with the balance of the plantation being auctioned off to white settlers. Today, the tribe holds 4-acre reservation. The Chappaquiddick Island was their plantation, and early on, the charm of the place attracted colonizers. Reluctant to challenge colonial arrogance, they found themselves being displaced on their own land. Through a process of encroachment, along with racial and political pressure, the Chappaquiddics found themselves relegated to the poorest soil on the island. Unable to grow food or have access to needed resources, they eventually were displaced from their Aboriginal lands. They were absorbed by other tribes like Mashpee and Aquinnah, while others were acculturated into society. Concerted efforts are currently ongoing to regain some foothold on their Aboriginal island. The Mashpee Plantation was established around 1666 by deed from Tukenchosen and Weekush, 2 sachems, sovereigns of the area, to the South Sea Indians, never to be sold or alienated unless they all agree. This deed was recorded in the Plymouth Registry and accounted for approximately 50 square miles. After long and contentious relations with the colony and eventually the Commonwealth, the traditional communal land ownership and government was disrupted by the creation of the Mashpee District, a quasi-political body allotting their lands among the tribal proprietors. Individual land ownership, along with the associated benefits and liabilities, was certainly a foreign concept, and they were given 28 years to learn the process. In 1870, the Mashpee District became the incorporated town of Mashpee, contrary to the vote of the people and the recommendations of the Senate Earl Report, which recognized that the population was not large enough, nor was there an economy to support a tax base. It is said that within 20 years, 80% of the land titles changed hands. By 1930, the town was bankrupt and went into receivership to the state. The state formed the Mashpee Advisory Committee to develop a tax base for the town, and over a 30-year period, the majority of the land ownership left tribal hands and into major development interest. Beginning in the 1960s and 70s, a once sleepy town on Cape Cod became the fastest growing town in the country. In 1976, the Mashpee tribe filed a land claim suit under the 1790 Non-Intercourse Act, trying to stop indiscriminate development of their Aboriginal lands. The defense countered whether Mashpee constituted a tribe under the 1790 Act. Consequently, there was no formal definition of tribe, and they spent 40 days and 40 nights before an all-white jury to decide whether they met a criteria formulated by the court. The jury's decision was inconsistent with the instructions of the judge, and after deliberation, he declared, "You can be a tribe for any other purpose except for the return of your lands. The consequences are too great." In 1978, the Department of Interior developed the federal recognition criteria. It took Mashpee about 12 years to complete the petition. In 2007, 30 years after, Mashpee became federally recognized. The tribe pursued a casino opportunity in an effort to generate jobs and revenue for its people. And to this day, they continue to fight to meet eligibility criteria imposed by the colonizer. The Gay-Hittaquinna tribe of Martha's Vineyard has a similar history, with their plantation lands were also allotted and subject to them to taxation. They also filed a land claim suit, although after witnessing the racial and political trauma Mashpee endured, they opted for a land claim settlement. Their reservation was established. They became eligible federal programs, housing, and other benefits. They are subject to federal jurisdiction, to state jurisdiction. They also have casino aspirations, initially in 1990 in New Bedford, more recently in the bingo operation on their lands in the island. And they too are fighting criteria imposed by the colonizer. So here we are, 2020, 400 years of colonization. And when I consider that we have been on this land for millenniums and have taken on all challenges to our continued evolution as people of this land, I would say the white man has been our most formidable adversary. You have imposed the fear of your God upon us, confined us into praying towns for indoctrination on how to become a good Christian human being. You gave us the Bible, but no formal education on how to survive in your land. You have clear-cut our forests, destroyed our habitat, our ability to live in harmony with our Mother Earth. You have broken down our communal structure, our sense of family, into individuals competing. Rather than being a self-sufficient community, we have become dependent on your system that we have found to be unforgiving. As we have evolved our attempts to participate in the economic opportunities, so many of you have prospered through exploitation of our resources, to this day we find ever-challenging obstacles to prevent our success. As we look around this hemisphere, around the world, you have been consistent in your treatment upon indigenous people on their own land, oppressive, destructive, genocidal. Of all the principles that I was told through an attempted Christian indoctrination, your actions towards indigenous people has been contrary to your faith. It is hard to conceive that your God instructed the Pope to declare such papal bulls that non-Christians are non-human, granting the right to conquer and consign them to perpetual servitude. But that is literally what continues to be imposed upon us to this day. Some say we have survived to remind you of your sins and help you to see the light. It has been difficult to have patience with you. I am humbled to know that there are a number of us who continue our connection to the spirit of this land, that determination will continue to find stability and a secure path for our people, for our future generations to evolve as we have for millenniums, despite the obstacles placed before us. I pray to the Great Spirit every day, giving thanks for the first light. I pray for our people that they are well and without want or need. I pray for all human beings, that they can find clarity in thought and understanding of our ultimate purpose in life, our obligation to provide a just and harmonious world for our future generations. Aho. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for speaking the hard truth and the much needed Native narrative on this moment in history, one that is told far too often with that colonizer lens. And equally important is the Indigenous voice as to how this history has impacted Native people today. Thank you so much for bringing that to this event today. Thank you. Next, we have our topic is cultural preservation. And it's important to understand that tribes and tribal citizens have been doing the challenging work of cultural preservation in a colonized mainstream society. Some aspects of cultural preservation is through traditional and contemporary singing and songwriting. So today, I am very honored to introduce Brian Blanchette. Blanchette is a New England native, Mohegan Abenaki, and he has studied music at the world-renowned Berklee College of Music. That's so cool. His drum group, the Black Hot Singers, has performed internationally to critical acclaim, and they have released 2 CDs. So we have a video we're going to Brian right now. Thank you.
I believe that language reclamation is just as important as a forest reclaiming the land. A culture lies within the language. So even if you're speaking 1 or 2 words a day, when incorporating that into your language, your ancestors are listening. This is a new song called Truth. It's in both languages. I like to refer to this as a Banglish. And it really reflects what's going on in the world today. Be brave, be strong, my friend, my family. These are times like no time we have seen. Brave men hiding from their dignity. Cowards are claiming victory. Come too far to look back. Be proud with a big heart, my children, my ancestry. The lies may hide from, but can't define. Truth you will see. Stealing from the free, it's our reality. They take what they want, not what they need. She'd lie and deceive. Take from the free. Then the war Gemudina in Bakada. Then the war Gemudina in Bakada. Fed the lies for so long, I believe what I see. The children are marching in the street. It's giving me something real to believe. Not latching on to a dream. Then the war Gemudina in Bakada.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Brian. Brian Blanchett, that was beautiful. Next, we have Larry Spotted Crow Mann. I had introduced him earlier as he had done our opening words and song to start this event off proper. Larry will be discussing the importance of cultural preservation through the work he does as co-director of Ohketeau Cultural Center, a storyteller and an author. Thank you, Larry.
Kudabadamish. Kudipiyam. Thank you all for listening out there once again. It's a real honor to be a part of this. And just to keep the music going a little bit, I wanted to open up again with another song, and this time with our traditional rattle song, which we call sometimes referred to as longhouse songs. So I'm going to share this song here. Rattle songs in the Nipmuc language. Yahweh, 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 na. We ya na, we ya na, we ya. Hayana, we ya na, we na. We ya na, we ya ne ya. Hayana, we ya na, we ya. Haya, we ya na, we na. Kiti yang nu wichi nipi ya we ya. Kiti yang nipi chi ne no one. Chemoche monake, chemoche monake, chemoche monake, ya hey ya, ya hey ya hey ya hey ya. Kiti yang nuwachi nipi ya we ya, nipi kiti yang nuwachi no one. Chemoche monake, chemoche monake, chemoche monake, ya hey ya. Yahweh, 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 Yah. 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 Yahweh, 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 Yah. Kiti yang nuwachi nipi Yahweh, Yah. Nipi kiti yang nuwachi nenawan. Chemoche monake, chemoche monake, chemoche monake, Yahweh, Yah. At the bottom, thank you, thank you. I wanted to start off with that song. Let me get a drink here. This is a song that we would share. As I said earlier, I'm in part of my traditional homeland here in the Quinnebog watershed, and so the rivers and the ocean were our highways, our places of trade, our familiar passageways to really share, connect, nourish, and really live our fullest experiences of who we are as a people. However, unfortunately, through the dams and industrial revolution, a lot of that was lost, but I don't have time to get into all that conversation today. But it's important to share this song because it is about the story that we share when we sing these songs. And by the way, the words are in Nipmuc, and the translations are, we live for the water lived for us. Paddle strong, human beings, paddle strong. And the translation in English would sometimes be water is life. And so water was acknowledged as a living being and as a relative that we would share, because we are living for the water and the water is living for us. And we're taught that if you take care of these things, the trees here, the birds, and all the different living things around us, and they'll take care of you. They want to help us. And that's an important thing. So I'm really honored by what I heard here today, and some very powerful words. And a lot of it, some of you out there may be hearing it for the first time. And we have a very difficult conversation to get to. And our stories, our music, our language, our drum, our dances, our healing medicine that keep us going, that keep us alive, that keep our communities vibrant. But we have this hard conversation that needs to be had in this wider, larger dialogue that's happening here today. And it's very important. Again, as Rhonda, my sister Rhonda shared, my name is Larry Spotted Crow Mann. I'm from the Nipmuc Nation. I'm a writer, culture educator, traditional storyteller. I've been sharing my work now for about 3 decades. I've traveled to different parts of the world with my books. very humbled and honored to be able to share Nipmuc voice in spaces where I thought it would never be. A little background on my tribe. Again, the Nipmuc people. Nipmuc means people of the fresh water. Our homeland once stretched 4 states, which was about 2,000 square miles from the Connecticut River, just on the other side of Natick, northern Connecticut, northern Rhode Island, and the southern tip of New Hampshire. And a lot of that loss was explained very eloquently and succinctly by Jim Peters earlier in this conversation, where my people were essentially pushed down to 4.5 acres in Grafton. And also prior to that, I'm a descendant of the survivors of Deer Island after the 1678 King Philip's War, where much of that decimation took place on Nipmuc homeland. We've lost thousands of people. Our people were sold into slavery. The ones who chose to try to follow the English way and go into these praying towns such as Natick and Grafton and Wamasset and several others, they were rounded up because the English said, well, they're all Indians. We can't really trust any of them. So they were rounded up and taken to Deer Island in October, right around this time, actually, of the year. And with no provisions, no food, no shelter, and hundreds starved to death. And those who didn't starve to death and die were captured by pirate slave merchants who were just snatching them off the island. And I'm here today because some of those people didn't die. I'm here today because the willingness of my ancestors to pursue and be who they are, and still try to believe in what this country stood for. Because not only that, my story continues on where I'm the son of the Revolutionary War 2 times, 2 grandfathers, and then following that, my great-great-great-grandfathers and all their siblings fought in the Union Army for the Civil War. And there's a book about them in the Mashpee Museum entitled From Appomattox to Mashantucket, and it highlights a lot of my relatives, the Vickers, Pegan family, and Hazards, and those are all my relatives there. And it talks about the sacrifice that these indigenous people were doing while their kids were being put in boarding schools. Their land was usurped. And so these are the experiences that we are evolved from and that we've had to endure and survive from and to continue on with their culture. Myself, I'm now in my early 50s. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Western Mass, and it was probably one of the most horrible experiences in my life, going to school, being pushed to the outside from a world that was essentially going through its crisis of the busing and all the different things that were going on, and Native people were just kind of an enigma to everybody. And so we were the least likely to get support from whether it was our teachers, our community, and so on, unless we were within our own enclaves. And so it was probably one of the worst times of my life being a Native person, and the teachers telling me I don't exist, or cut your hair, or you people are savages, and stop being wild, and all these different pejorative things that I had to kind of deal with. And that led to a very difficult time in my life. It led drugs, alcohol, and I nearly died by the time I was 21. Remarkably, I've always been a person who wanted to learn. I loved science, I loved knowledge, and of course, alcohol was impeding that journey for me. And I was near death at 21. And ironically, in the hospital, PBS was on a documentary about Christopher Columbus, of all people. And they're going into this, the narrative is talking about how alcohol was introduced to the Native people from Europe and summarily destroyed every fabric of their life through this weaponized alcohol. And after I watched that, I can't really explain in words what came over me, but it was an awakening that is still alive in me today after 30 years, because I left that hospital and never drank again after that day. And I began on this journey, this looking around in this post-apocalyptic fog of what we call America, and trying to figure out what has happened to my ancestors, the boarding schools, the usurping of land, the generational trauma, and all the different things that we've experienced. Basically, essentially telling Native people that we're here to benefit. We're just hapless bystanders benefiting from white proximity, that we have no contributions to the world. They didn't teach us about the wonderful polyculture of the Three Sisters, how this technique of growing is far outweighs the monoculture of the English. They didn't teach us that because of the discovery of rubber and petroleum by the indigenous people here, there would not be an industrial revolution. They didn't tell us that the women's suffrage movement was actually started by Iroquois people, our neighbors over here. We didn't get to learn these things. We just got to see ourselves on a football helmet. The proud savage, the warrior in this perpetual state of violence, always ready to fight and do these kind of things. No intellectual curiosity. The incredible amount of science, intellectual pursuits, philosophy, diplomacy, romance, all the different things, music, philosophy, were not attributed to the indigenous people, where it was essentially stolen from. And today science is still trying to catch up. And they call it something called quantum physics, I believe, when they're trying to understand the singularity that indigenous people talk about when we say all my relations. Well, we were already talking about that. When you look behind me, I see my relatives here, the trees and the birds that are going by. And it's not just this abstract notion, it's real, because we're all just vibrating. We're all just vibrations of this universe, right? We're all just broken down. When we look at in the molecular level, we're just vibrations. We're these tiny little things of light coming together to make what we are, us, right? And so the trees are doing it, birds are doing it, the water's doing it, everything. And so we're not separated from anything. But what happened to indigenous people, right? In this country, we did get separated from all this knowledge. We were told we don't fit in. We were told we don't belong. And that has devastating effects on the psyche, on the emotional outcome of a human being when they're taught to feel that they're nothing. And I've experienced it. We're seeing this today, because this goes right into our contemporary issues of across reservations, the United States and Canada, where indigenous people are disproportionately likely to commit suicide, drugs, alcohol, or the big three that we call depression, alcoholism, and diabetes, that we suffer from these disproportionately, needlessly. These all are attributed to about the story. And so what are we telling the story to ourselves as Native people? What is this country telling the story to themselves? And we talked a little bit about that earlier when we looked at the Doctrine of Discovery. When we think about in terms of the Doctrine of Discovery, we're thinking about America, promised lands, God's chosen people, endless resources, opportunity, freedom. Well, there's people like myself who come from none of that. We come from a shared and lived experience of genocide, enslavement, removal, boarding schools, Jim Crow laws, segregation, children separated at their borders, police brutality, and on it goes. So we have these two stories of America. These two stories are being told, but they are in complete conflict. There is no common memory to our story as a country. So how do we get there, folks? How do we get there? This is where you come in. This is where we all come in together to kind of get to that better place. Because as I said, this is a hard conversation to have. You know, the childhood I had, the childhood that indigenous people are experiencing today. Right here in the state of Massachusetts, between 2014 and 2016, we had 24 deaths from either opioid overdose or suicide in the Native American community. That's 2 years straight. We were losing a child a month because of the devastation of all that stuff that happened in the past, because of the story that we're told we're nothing, we don't belong. There's no curriculum that meets our needs. There's no identity. There's no place to self-actualize outside our own community, where we're already dealing with the emotional, generational, and physical traumas that we've had endured. I think about my mother's generation. When her time, interracial marriage was illegal. And just going back to my time, in 1978, it was still illegal for me to have this and the drum and to sing. It wasn't until 1978 that Native Americans had the right to practice their culture, Freedom of Native American, Freedom of Religion Act. You can look it up. So think about the experience of the story that we've had to endure here as indigenous people. Reflect on my grandfather's time, born in 1904. He was born in Geronimo down in Florida, was still a prisoner of war. My grandfather's grandmother experienced boarding schools and land taking away by the state. And my grandfather's oldest brother was the last one to be taken. He was born in 1867 and taken at the age of 13 and didn't see his siblings until he was 18. And on the records that my cousin Bernie has the records of when he was taken to the school, and they have him listed as an inmate. So they were listing Native children and boys and girls as inmates when they would take them. You know, already just giving them, maligning their identity from the start. So again, this problem that we have, this dilemma, this crisis of culture, this crisis of understanding about what America really is and what it really means to us as citizens of America, needs to open up and really reflect on what has really happened here. You know, I've spent, as I said, almost 3 decades thinking about all these different things and learning and sharing the different parts of the world. And a big part of that work is healing this story and sharing that story as a traditional storyteller. Whether it's the story of the 3 sisters, how Crow brought the corn, how Bobcat lost his tail, the gift of the strawberry, all our ancient stories connect us to what you're seeing back here behind me. And that's what we need, that reconnection, that remembering back to our land that was taken away from us. And we can't do that when our land's being removed and we're being put on somebody else's land. We can't do that when the stories are being told, just shut up and get along and be like everybody else, melt into the pot. Well, what are we melting into? We don't know. Nobody really knows. We haven't figured that out yet. The Native American people here in the East, we have gone up against the most powerful empire that's ever existed in human history, and we're still here. The removal couldn't take away our culture. The wars couldn't take away our culture. The disease couldn't take away our culture. The boarding schools couldn't take away our culture. We're still here. A lot less of us, yes, but we're still here. And that should be an awakening to the colonized forces, to the other people of the world, and think about, why are they still doing it? Why do they care so much about the land? Well, we've been trying to tell you something for 1,000 years. The land, we are the land, and the land is us. And this is the important fabric of what I do with my work, which I'll mention as director of Ohketeau Cultural Center. This is where all this comes into play. I'm very honored to be the director of Ohketeau, along with my partner in crime, Rhonda. She's also the co-director. And what we do there, what we call place-based education, whether it's giving our youth a place to learn STEM from an Indigenous scholar, or learning how to brain, tan, and hide, practice their culture, drumming, dance classes, or any form of creativity exploration you can imagine. They have that opportunity to do it at Ohketeau. And we're really pleased to have Ohketeau, because we certainly didn't have the funds to do something like this on our own within our tribal community. We were supported by the Double Edge Theater, which is just across the road from Ohketeau. And with generous support from the Double Edge Theater and the people there, they donated that space to us that we can have it now for our Indigenous scholarship, our Indigenous culture explorations, and all the different things from youth to elders to have that opportunity to share in that space. So you, by listening in today, you have the opportunity to donate to that work that's going on there, and the Nipmuc Preservation Trust and the other organizations that are seeking that support. I can't tell you enough how happy I am to see how things are coming along. Of course, we have a lot of work to do in this world, but I'm very optimistic in terms of where I came from, and thinking about the different things that I had to experience as an Indigenous person, that our voices are being heard. As I said, going to kindergarten and middle school and grade school, the teachers were yelling at me and laughing at me and mocking me for being an Indigenous person. And now we're actually being listened to. And so I believe people are waking up. People are beginning to listen. And hopefully another Native person doesn't have to suffer, and that we can get the services to our communities that are needed. And it's going to take everybody. We're seeking allies. We're seeking support, because in my different works and endeavors that I've experienced, whether it's here or traveling to Greenland or different parts of Europe or South America. Just before the pandemic, I was down in Ecuador and speaking at the University of Cuenca, and I got to share with some really gifted elders there who actually came out of the Amazon. They knew I was coming, and I just so humbled. One of the Amazon elder came to hear me speak, and what an honorable opportunity I had to listen to his words. He came to hear me. I was just thrilled to hear him up in 8,000 feet above sea level, which was an experience in itself. And so it's just an honor to make all these connections with our different communities and people. And everywhere I go, I've learned it's going to take all of us as this global effort of coming together. And so I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm going to get ready to close. But before I do that, I just want to also share a few words about how this pandemic has been affecting all of our people. So this adds another layer of the crisis, right? Within our Nipmuc community, we've lost too many people to count. And I just want to send out blessings and healing to all those people who've lost somebody through this troubled time. One person we lost, my dear cousin, and traditionally we don't say that person's name, but he taught our language, and he's deeply missed. And so we have a lot of making up to do with him not being here. We have a lot of making up to do in terms of work in our communities. And I'm really honored and proud to see that the youth, the communities are coming together, the church acknowledging their role in the Doctrine of Discovery, the church acknowledging how they put forth a lot of these atrocities, and really recognizing how they can turn that around and really help. Because we can all be bitter and stay angry in our own little personal corners of grief and bitterness, but then that doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't get us to a better place. What will get us to a better place is these open dialogues, this space where we can speak freely about my experience in Massachusetts as a Native person, how it sucked. So we can get to a better place, so other students don't have to go through that. We can develop a curriculum. Ohketeau is doing things like that. And so with that, I want to thank you all for listening to me. And for more on our work, go to our website, go to my website, see some of the things that we're up to. Reach out to your local community, wherever you are at listening to this. There's a tribe there that's probably in need of your help. So I always say, go local too. So with that, I say, Kutabadamish.
Thank you so much, Larry, for sharing, and especially the water song. Oh my goodness, that brings back memories of the Deer Island paddle, where we would be doing that. We would have done that last weekend.
Yes. Yes.
Had the pandemic not been here. And again, thank you. I'm so honored to be working with you as the co-director of Ohketeau. Honestly, you know this. It's been a dream of mine for many years.
Hugs.
And yes, and to create a better world for our children and their children's children and the next 7 generations ahead. So thank you so much for sharing your powerful experiences and your truth in your words. That's a perfect segue into our next portion of this presentation, which is land back, food and medicine. And this is an important topic, as much of the indigenous peoples of this continent have been dispossessed of their traditional homelands, either through forced removal, genocide, or warfare. Access to our traditional medicines and foods from the land are an important part of one's cultures and absolutely necessary for healing. So in that way, I am honored to introduce Stephanie Morningstar. Stephanie is the board president, treasurer, and executive director of New England Farmers of Color Land Trust and Resources, Relationships and Reciprocity co-director. Stephanie is a citizen of the United Nations. They are an herbalist, soil and seed steward, scholar, student, and earth worker dedicated to decolonizing and liberating minds, hearts, and land, one plant, one person, ecosystem, and non-human being at a time. They will be talking to us today about the role of land trusts in reclaiming access to native lands. Thank you.
Seiko Sewa Guego, everybody. I'm Stephanie Morningstar. I'm Oneida Turtle Clan, and I am the Executive Director and Resources, Relationships, and Reciprocity Co-Director for the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. Let's take a moment to find the headwaters of our breath and recognize and ground in why we're all here, our ancestral relationships to land and each other. This map, created by the Native Land Project, is a representation of Turtle Island's multitude of indigenous territories, languages, and peoples, freed from the colonial boundaries that have carved into the indigenous landscape. The lands I make a life on are known as the lands of the relatives of the Maple Nation, Treaty 3 and Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement territory. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the work that NEFOC does, and specifically in relationship to how we are advancing tools to undo and dismantle some of the harm that the Doctrine of Discovery has caused. So before we begin, I just wanted to share one of the things that we're doing in order to be able to do this, which is actually creating and illustrating or showing folks what an actively actionable land acknowledgement is. So I'm going to share really briefly our land acknowledgement in hopes that maybe folks might take a page and not just checking a land acknowledgement off the box, but also to like build a little bit of action and something, a backbone into the land acknowledgement that not only acknowledges land, but also acknowledges the action steps you're taking to repair harm. Land acknowledgements are traditionally done by settlers on Indigenous territory. So we don't traditionally do land acknowledgements in our own territories. But that being said, this is a very large region, and I want to just acknowledge that we are serving more than just my own homelands. So the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust exists in the spirit of active and inclusive reconciliation. We occupy and serve the territory of the Northeast, part of what is currently called the United States, a colonial framework constructed upon the living land that is Turtle Island. I am honored and grateful to stand in my territory of my homelands, Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement territory. We recognize that acknowledging the traditional territories, the original stewards of the lands, is opening a door to actionable reconciliation, repair, and relationship building. We are working to advance land access for Black, Indigenous, and people of color with an understanding that the territories we occupy hold the history and trauma of colonization, forced removal, and land theft. We embody and honor this by understanding and considering carefully how we engage the lands we may come to hold in trust through the establishment of and continuous consultation with the traditional Indigenous leadership of the territories within our service area. We're also advancing strategies such as cultural respect easements, voluntary taxation, and other tools for acknowledging and repairing the complex history of colonization, and by listening and moving at the speed of trust while we do so. This is a quick just glance at a map created by the eHistory Project that shows the, in blue, the original territories in what is now called the US. And you can see in these little red, there are tiny little red sections which are reserve lands or reservation lands. And then the east part of this is actually unceded territory, the original 13 colonies. And that means that there are barely any, if any, treaties in any of those territories, meaning that this is truly stolen land. And because of that, we have a responsibility to engage the governance systems of these territories that are still unceded and that have these states superimposed on them. That actually is the keystone to some of our work, which is to advance land sovereignty in the Northeast region through permanent and secure land tenure for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and Asian farmers and land stewards who will work with the land in a manner that is sacred and honors our ancestors' collective dreams for sustainable farming, human habitat, ceremony, native ecosystem, and cultural preservation. We're honoring these relationships in the fact that this is stolen land by some relationship Indigenous communities and acknowledging that this is unceded territory. So we really need the permission and the voice of these folks in order to be able to do anything on their homelands. So I just wanted to be clear about that, as the work for the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust truly is a desire to connect people of color farmers to land to grow healthy foods and medicines for our communities. And we plan to accomplish this by returning land to Indigenous, Black, and POC farmers and land stewards while centering and respecting the Indigenous rights and responsibilities in these homelands. So at our outset, we've built in some accountability mechanisms that have been identified and will be added to our bylaws. That really honor the rights and responsibilities of Indigenous communities as Nefolk Land Trust projects take place on their ancestral territories. So we are establishing co-created spaces within which to understand each other better, and our work will happen on the land, in our offices, in ceremony, at kitchen tables, over the phone and internet, and in community. It's deeply, deeply rooted in building relationships with one another. And I just wanted to be clear about that the work that we're doing is truly really centering those relationships. I want to say thank you, Nyawagoa, to everybody for participating in today's activities. Thanks so much for learning a little bit about Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And I'm really grateful to be with this today.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your beautiful words and the space to give land tenure to Indigenous people and people of color and honoring that relationship to land. Thank you for your words. Next, we will have Leah Penniman, who is co-director and farm manager of Soulfire Farm since 2010. Lee has had over 20 years of experience as a soil steward and food sovereignty activist, having the mission to reclaim our inherent right to belong to the earth and have agency in the food system as Black and Brown people. Leah will be talking about Soulfire Farm, reclaiming Afro-Indigenous regenerative farming practices, decolonized ways of growing food that collaborate with ecosystems, and rooted in Indigenous, African, and Indigenous Turtle Island growing techniques. Thank you.
Greetings, peace and blessings, family. My name is Leah Penniman. I'm the farm manager and co-director at Soulfire Farm in Mohican and Haudenosaunee Territory, Grafton, New York. I am surrounded by these beautiful, bright, native pollinating plants. And these were grown using our version of African dark earth. African dark earth is a type of super rich compost invented by women in Indigenous West Africa over millennia. It combines residues from the fire, the farm, and the kitchen. And the ethos in Indigenous West Africa is such that everyone is responsible for adding to the soil by making African dark earth. So much so that if you take a soil core, you can determine the age of the community by the depth and layers of the super rich compost. Imagine a soil ethic like that here in these lands. Well, under settler colonialism, the way we treat soil is very different. Within just one generation of settlers attacking the Great Plains with overgrazing and plow, they had burned up over 50% of the organic matter, driving it out of the soil into the atmosphere, which was the first spike in atmospheric CO2 and the beginning of anthropogenic climate change. Agriculture today still produces about 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that instituting global Indigenous regenerative practices is a way to put that carbon back in the soil where it belongs. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, we sequester around 8.5 metric tons of atmospheric carbon per acre. So if everyone were to farm this way, we could put 300 billion metric tons of carbon back into the soil where it belongs. So what practices are we talking about? When we talk about global Indigenous regenerative agriculture, this means no-till, permanent raised beds, perennial polycropping, cover crops, crop rotation, composting, and mulching. These practices have been passed down by our ancestors for generations. We know how to feed the planet without destroying the earth. Here at Soulfire Farm, by implementing these practices, we've been able to raise soil organic matter from around 2% when this land claimed us to over 12% today. Those are pre-colonial Indigenous levels of soil organic matter. So how can you help? The main way is to give the land back. Give the land back so folks native to Turtle Island can implement their regenerative practices, restore native ecosystems, care for one another and the planet according to the original instructions. And the best way to do this is to support the organizations that are being highlighted today. The Native Land Conservancy, Ohketeau Cultural Center, Nipmuc Cultural Preservation, and the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. It is time to return the lands. It is time to restore our covenant with the earth. It is time to implement ecological humility. Greetings, peace and blessings, family. My name is Leah Penniman. I'm the farm manager and co-director at Soulfire Farm in Mohican and Haudenosaunee Territory, Grafton, New York. I am surrounded by these beautiful
Thank you so much, Leah, for talking about Soulfire Farm and the reclaiming and decolonizing ways of growing food. that collaborate in our ecosystems. I appreciate your words so much. Next is our rights and respect portion of this presentation. And we'll be talking about how we can respect Indigenous people's identity and their sovereign rights. I will be talking to you about respecting the rights to our identity and regaining control over our identities and representation. So let me screen share with you. Take a second here. Hopefully that's up. Okay, I am Iñupiaq-Athabascan of Alaska, and my native enrollment village is Ohketeau, which is a whaling village in Area 1002 of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge on the Beaufort Sea. My Ohketeau family depends on hunting, fishing, and whaling for food, and twice a year, as witnessed by the pictures of the polar bears by my cousin Carla, there are more polar bears than humans, and right now is one of those times. The government did not force dispossession of our traditional villages since time immemorial, so we don't have reservations, rancherias, or reserves. Let's see. Hopefully I can, yeah, there we go. There's a picture of my Akka. She's sitting in her sister's lap. She did not grow up in an igloo, but grew up in a clapboard house. And it was a 2-room house that 22 people lived in. On the top right is a picture of my grandmother, Iñupiaq, and her sister Alak, who's my namesake. At the bottom left is my Appa, my grandfather Johnny. He went to a Klutna residential Indian school. And at that school, they removed native languages and cultures from the children. He quit school at age 16 to become a bush pilot and later a commercial pilot. My dad and I were both born in Fairbanks. He grew up in Fairbanks, living a life that you might recognize, you know, lots of baseball and college. One thing that I want to do is have you see through the eyes of an Indigenous person growing up here in Massachusetts. I want you to see what I see. The educational system upholds the myths of Thanksgiving and Plymouth Rock, using a dominant colonizer lens on history. And using this colonizer lens creates a more comfortable account, and also doing a great job of erasing Native narratives and our histories of thousands of years. So I hope that this 400th anniversary of Plymouth and Patuxet, we can finally begin to hear Indigenous voices like we did today with Jim, and start some kind of truth and reconciliation process. The area that I live in is full of plaques commemorating colonizers and referencing natives only as Indians, savages, or the attackers. The term Indians erases the identity of and lumps some 567 very different cultures, identities, and even races of Indigenous peoples into one term, Indians. This form of erasure is a painful reminder that we are not important enough to recognize. And even when the plaque is kind and it's recognizing Indigenous tribes in essential places, they're still wrong. Clifton Q. Richmond named the Mohawk Trail in 1913 by greatly exaggerating claims that this was Mohawk traditional territory. We can see today those cultural appropriations and stereotypical caricature representations that have nothing to do with the people here, and yet continuing to exist, giving the nod to manifest destiny and westward expansion. On this Mohawk Trail, I cannot think of a more culturally appropriated cluster of misinformation that fully participates in erasure. And on top of that is highlighted on every scenic highway signpost, the Hail to the Sunrise statue. The Improved Order of Red Men installed the fountain and statue. The Improved Order was a group that only accepted white people and then gave them Indian names. and belonged to clubs or orders that they then called by tribal names. Those are the words on the fountain. They are not actual tribal native nations in support of this landmark. And at the bottom of the screen, it shows the prevailing mainstream attitude is then cemented, to coin a phrase, that we are gone, as this review noted, wiped off the continent. This type of education of disappearance and erasure begins early in schools with institutional racism. Coleraine Central School and other elementary schools in the district used these books. In 2012, these books are classified as nonfiction and were being introduced to my daughter's 3rd grade class. So it's really important to understand that subjectivity to a 3rd grader, it's hard for them to know when learning about fiction versus nonfiction for the first time. So from this book, they read the book, The Courage of Sarah Noble. They read that Indians eat human meat off the bone and would just as soon skin you alive. The author likened Indians to little brown mice. The vocabulary words were heathen, squaw, savage, Indian, moccasin. The test that came home with the sentence, Indians are savages, was because my daughter asked for a sample sentence for the word savage, and her teacher replied, Indians are savages. We actually had my daughter's friends sitting at our dinner table saying my daughter was not Native because she wasn't a heathen savage that ate human meat off the bone. This book had devastating and long-lasting effects. Elementary schools participating in institutional racism education with stereotyping and biases is further cemented with mascots and team names in high schools. As you know, I'm a longtime activist on removing Native mascots, participating from afar in the late 1990s, changing Frontier's mascot from the R-Skins to the Red Hawks. And in September of 2016, I was very active in the change of Turners Falls High School Indians, seeing the vote for change happen February 14th of 2017. It was after a long, challenging, and very divisive battle. In March of 2019, I began to work on the Mohawk Trail Regional High School Warriors team name and mural. The school committee voted under duress from pro-mascot individuals to keep the name and yet remove the problematic mural from the gymnasium wall. And I'm hoping that they recognize they have some more work to do. Both Turners Falls and Mohawk are high schools that I attended. My daughter does not go to the district high school, which would be Mohawk, because I do not want her to have the same issues with mascots that I did. Instead, I have proudly cheered her and our friends on as aardvarks and otters. Through these stereotypical representations, mascots erase the identity of Native people. It generates stereotypes about what a Native person looks like and portrays us as people in the past. Empirical evidence shows that these representations lead to Native students struggling with that positive identity. Through the use of mascots, non-Native students are left with stereotypes about who we are. This stereotyping makes Native students feel unsafe and unwelcome, which is a civil rights violation. The use of these mascots in educational settings greenlights more widespread community stereotyping, making it acceptable and okay to do. Most portrayals of Native mascots are warlike, aggressive, and violent, as evidenced by our local newspaper headlines, which read Indians invade and town braces for Indian attack, as well as the outright cultural appropriation by wearing a stereotypical headdress to the games. As Larry has often said, and I do as well, we are the last accepted vestige of overt racism in this country. I would go so far as to say even celebrated racism and celebrated cultural appropriation. Mainstream society views Native people as ignorant drunks, savage warriors, or sexualized Pocahontas. This kind of representation leads to what most people think versus the truth, the romanticized princess versus the real struggles and violence we face as Indigenous peoples today, upholding our tribal sovereignties and Indigenous rights. So this is really important to understand because we have the highest rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Our teenagers have the highest rates of suicide. Our women have the highest rates of sexual assault. Our men have the highest rates of incarceration and death from police brutality. And yet we make up less than 2% of the population in the United States. So what the school system teaches us and what we see, those myths and stereotypes create biases that dramatically affect our outcomes. I have this picture because 6 months after Ryan Visions took this photograph of a young Dakota teenager, she committed suicide. It can be hard to visualize a future with yourself in it when you're facing such erasure and violence. There needs to be an understanding of how the rise of mascots began when Native children were removed from their homes and placed in boarding schools in a policy of intentional cultural genocide. Non-natives at that time struggled to find a common identity in the melting pot. They chose the native images to honor the warrior and the fallen savage, in that way giving nod to manifest destiny and attempting to control our identity and representation. We are the only race that is used for mascots, right alongside animals and chosen professions like cowboys and patriots, races that are not oppressed minorities such as Vikings, imaginary beings like leprechauns. Particularly in this day of racial justice, everyone must understand that the oppressions and marginalizations of any racial group is never acceptable. And we should not overlook racism in our children's educational system via mascots. If you Google my name and mascots, I'm sure you're going to see this picture. I was not yelling, I was not angry, but this is how I'm perceived. As a Native woman, I have found it dangerous to be speaking up for change. And other Native activists that I know have been subject to verbal harassment and even death threats. Despite multiple statements from Massachusetts tribes and communities, it is challenging to have in-person representation at the school with Native mascots, as we are 0.6% of the population here in Massachusetts. The silver lining to COVID-19 is Zoom. And through Zoom, I have participated in countless school committee and community meetings regarding mascots, logos, and team names this summer going into fall. Even this week, I have 2. Most of these meetings would have been prohibitive for my participation, given the time and distance during ordinary times. Gratefully, this summer saw mascot changes in Barnstable, Braintree, Grafton, Hanover, Medfield, Pittsfield, and Winchester schools. Given the intense burden and danger placed on the shoulders of an oppressed minority to attempt to make systemic changes locally, legislators must make changes on a state level rather than a town-by-town basis. Maine has passed legislation to ban Native mascots from our public schools, and Massachusetts should follow our neighbor's lead. So here's what we need from you. We need your support as allies and accomplices to support bill numbers S247, H443, and S2593, an act prohibiting the use of Native American mascots by public schools in the Commonwealth. We need you as constituents to call and email your senators and representatives and ask if they are willing to support this bill. When doing this, please advocate for the bill, add educational information and personal stories. Please share with your representatives and senators the informational panel that I presented and moderated this September 13th, a Native community conversation regarding mascots, imagery, and cultural appropriation. You can find this recording on HowlRound and Ohketeau.org website. Please watch it for yourself as well. We need to emphasize the amount of Indigenous support for this bill. The National Congress of American Indian, which is the country's largest and most representative Native American advocacy group, has been fighting to end racist mascots since 1968. Currently, over 145 tribal, government, education, professional, civil rights, and religious organizations in the United States have recognized the negative health impacts of Native American mascots and called for the elimination of or restrictions on Native American mascots. In Massachusetts, this includes the Chappaquiddick tribe of Wampanoag Nation, Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe, Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and the Massachusetts tribe Punkapog and the Nipmuc Nation. Lastly, please check out massindigenousagenda.org, MAindigenousagenda.org. There you can find more information, ways to help, and action items. We cannot pass this without your help. We need you. We need your voice, and we need your solidarity to end this overlooked racial injustice against our Native community. So Tavra, Koyanak, Nalag, Nagifsi, thank you for listening. So I'm gonna try to stop sharing and go back because next we have Joe Comerford. Senator Joe Comerford is an amazing human being. And I am so honored to be introducing such an incredibly passionate and caring individual. And it shows through her lifetime of work in crisis intervention, food insecurity, healthcare, and now as our state senator. Joe will be talking about the essential roles that towns, faith communities, groups, and individuals play in getting these laws advancing so that we can have our Native rights and respect passed through the legislature and signed by the governor. Take it away, Joe. Thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Rhonda. That was unbelievably powerful. And as I begin, please let me acknowledge that in Northampton, I am on Nipmuc land, and I want that to be known as we start this program. I'm going to share 3 slides, although I couldn't do I couldn't do 1/1,000,000th of what Rhonda just did in terms of the mascot. I'll talk about 3 bills, including the mascot bill, and call us all to action. So I believe someone's going to share slides, and thank you for that. Are the slides up? Forgive me. Okay, thank you, friends. So let me talk about 3 bills at first. The first bill that I'm going to talk about is actually a bill that was passed unanimously by the Massachusetts Senate. It's a resolve providing for the creation of a special commission relative to the seal and the motto of the Commonwealth. And let me say that this bill was decades in the making. It was led by Indigenous communities across the Commonwealth, and it was powered by Indigenous residents of this Commonwealth along with allies. It was powered across the finish line only in the Senate so far this session. It's an important bill which establishes a special commission consisting of 8 members to investigate the features and motto of the flag and the seal of the Commonwealth. This is a racist flag and seal and motto, and it must be changed. This bill creates a commission, 5 members of whom are descendants of historic Massachusetts tribal nations here in the Commonwealth. It sets a process forward which will transform this symbol that is in every auditorium, every place of gathering, every town hall. It must be transformed. So again, this is passed now unanimously by the Massachusetts Senate. It is in House Ways and Means, so the House bill is in House Ways and Means. It is awaiting action there. So first action item. Today, if you are in Massachusetts, call the House leadership and call your representative and say that you want this bill passed. We call it the Flag and Seal Bill. It is a resolve providing for the creation of a special commission relative to the seal and the motto of the Commonwealth. Okay, that's the first action step. Second, it's the bill that Rhonda spoke so beautifully about. It's an act prohibiting the use of Native American mascots in public schools in the Commonwealth. It bans the use of racist mascots in the Commonwealth once and for all. As Rhonda said beautifully, some communities, one by one, are changing their native mascots, are ridding their school communities of racist mascots. However, the state has an obligation to protect the civil and human rights of all. It is the state's responsibility to do this across the board, thereby enshrining in a law that they will be banned forever and can never come back, and then moving school communities that have not yet had the courageous organizers like embodied by Rhonda Anderson, not yet seen the right way forward. It will force them to change their native mascots, to adopt something else other than this racist symbol. This bill currently is in the Massachusetts Senate. It was reported out favorably, both sides, both the House and the Senate bill, from the Joint Committee on Education. It has not moved yet. In the Senate, it is my fervent hope, along with Indigenous leaders across the Commonwealth, that this bill moves this session. And you can bet that we're doing everything we possibly can. I am the lead sponsor of this bill, and we will not rest until it is passed. In the House, the sponsors are Representative Nika Elugardo and Representative Tammy Govea. Let me move to a third bill quickly. It is the bill to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day that was filed in the House by Representative Jack Lewis, and it repeals Columbus Day as the day we celebrate in October, and it puts in Indigenous Peoples Day in its place. Again, it's a way to retell our history, reframe the conversation, especially 400 years after colonization, and what we can and should do as a Commonwealth to tell the truth of the ravages of colonization, and what we have to do to set our Commonwealth on a new path. If we can go to the second slide, please. Okay, friends, this is the legislative cycle. So right now we are in the 191st legislative session. We have a 2-year session in Massachusetts, but we are moving in January to the next legislative cycle, the 192nd legislative cycle. So like I said, we are continuing work on these bills. The flag and seal bill, the work is in the House. The mascot bill, the work is in the Senate. So call your senators and ask them to bring this civil rights, this human rights bill to the floor. But should we not prevail this session in January, we file again. And so what this slide just tells you is that in January of 2021, we file these bills again. There'll be an opportunity to seek co-sponsorship of all of these bills. Let's build a greater, larger, more passionate cohort behind them. There'll be hearings for every bill filed, and then we'll work to get these bills out of committee by voting and onto the floor. So that is the next legislative cycle, even as we end this 2-year legislative cycle in these next handful of months. And then if we could go to the last slide. Thank you so much. Please let me thank the organizers of today. Thank you, Rhonda, for your beautiful, grace-filled, fierce facilitation of today, and to all the speakers. I am honored to join you today. This slide says people power makes all the difference. As an ally, as a white woman, I want to use my people power to propel these bills forward. Of course, these are not the only bills that Indigenous communities will want us to pass. We need to listen deeply to the Indigenous leaders here on this forum and across the Commonwealth. We need to be in service of moving the ideas forward that make the most sense to them. And let me tell you one thing about the legislature. You matter. Voters matter, constituents matter. We are elected to serve you. We work for the people of the Commonwealth. Therefore, call, email, write every House and Senate member you have a relationship with, especially if they are your House and Senate members. Write leadership in both the House and Senate. Write the governor. schedule Zoom meetings. I thought it was beautiful that Rhonda said that she's been on so many Zoom meetings. I have been on some of them. They are still powerful, even in COVID. We can gather, take to social media, tag people, call us out, have the conversations in the light of social media. It's one of the venues that we can turn to make a difference, and do events like these to help facilitate media, gather people, galvanize ideas. It's up to us to be the strongest possible allies. Those of us who are white and or want to be allies to these important bills and the bills to come. It's up to us to do everything we can to prioritize these and not let up until we prevail. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate you being here today and talking about your action items. That's so important. And rallying people power. Yes, thank you so much for the work that you do, for your listening deeply, and just for your service. I thank you. I am so honored. I can't go on raving, but we should take a break and just bring things down a little bit. We have John Sheldon coming up next. John and I were at Standing Rock at the same time during Thanksgiving of 2016, although we never knew it because there was 10,000 people there. We both were in ceremony together at Ohketeau Cultural. And because we were there at Ohketeau Cultural camp in ceremony, we are now related in that way. I got to know his music. It's just so beautiful. His music alone tells incredible stories, even without lyrics. John Sheldon is in his 50th year of writing songs, collaborating, composing music, and performing his unique, beautiful style of telling stories through electric and acoustic guitar. So here is a clip of John talking about his time at Ohketeau Cultural camp and performing Water is Life songs from Standing Rock. Thank you.
My name is John Sheldon. I had prepared something to say, but I'm going to change it right now because I realized something as I'm standing here on this ground. My ancestors, I've traced them back to the mid-1600s in this area. Most of them came from England and Wales. If you go to Old Deerfield, you can visit the John Sheldon House. My ancestors were alive in this area when the massacre here took place. So I would like right now to offer my heart to this place in reconciliation. I do not know how my ancestors participated. I don't know how I would find out. But I'm here, and I would like to offer that as reconciliation. What is in my heart, which is nothing but love for all of my brothers and sisters who have lived here and are living here now. You know, it's Standing Rock. We ask the question, when we go home from this place in the Dakotas, what do we do? And the answer came back, the answer that I heard was, find your prayer to the water. Because that prayer was about the water. And so since then, I've spent a lot of time sitting by streams and rivers and creeks swamps, and opening my heart and feeling the mutual respect and reverence. Now, it's nice to open the heart, but when you open the heart, you also open to the pain of the desecration. So I really have come to realize that in order to bear that pain, I need to be in community. I need to feel other people that are with me. And because I'm kind of a loner at heart, that becomes difficult sometimes, but I will share this song to honor the prayer that we all can be part of. Water is life. Cut off and aloof, we lost sight of nature's truth, and we poisoned our water without knowing what we had done. Now, somehow, the shiny plated God we had prayed to and obeyed was melting in the sun. We looked around at each other. We did not see the other, only sister and brother. And we knew then we were one, protectors standing with no weapons in our hands and with only scarred lands to hear. Somehow we sang, we live under the same sun, we drink the same water. In water we are one. We live under the same sun, we are of the water. To the water we return. And in that song I heard something I remember, something from a long time ago. Gathering of ancestors, red, white, black, yellow, brown, standing in a circle. A light rain coming down like ancient wisdom, falling from a star, telling us a story. Who and what we are. And each one held a cup, and each one held it up, and every cup was filled, not a drop was spilled. And we live under the same sun, we drink the same water. In water we are one. We live under the same sun, we are of the water. To the water we return. Thank you.
That's so beautiful. In water, we are one. Thank you so much, John. It's always an honor to hear your words and to listen to the music in your soul playing on the strings of your guitar. Thank you so much. And now we have come to the time for closing prayers for justice and peace. I am happy to introduce Rabbi Ben Weiner from the Jewish community of Amherst. Rabbi Weiner is a writer, a scholar of Yiddish and Irish literature, a musician and a homesteader, and a dad with a sleeping child in his arms. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's my honor to be here today. Just briefly in this closing period, I want to offer a traditional Jewish prayer, and then I want to offer a brief personal reflection, then I want to offer that same prayer again. The prayer is called Modeh Ani, and it's the first prayer that we say in the morning when we get up. And the Hebrew, Modeh Ani, literally means it can mean two things. It can mean I acknowledge, and it can mean I give thanks. And what we say is I acknowledge and give thanks to you for returning my spirit to me in trust and faithfulness, and giving me the opportunity to move forward into this new day. And I'm thinking about this phrase, Modeh Ani, which can mean I acknowledge and give thanks. And in that vein, and in the spirit of this day, there's three kind of brief personal reflections I want to offer. The first is about my great-grandparents who were born in what was the Jewish reservation of Tsarist Russia, the Pale of Settlement, and who came as children on steerage ships to this country following waves of state-sponsored murder, pillage, and rape, and found freedom and eventually prosperity, and escaped the more serious genocide that was to come. And although there is a slight tendency sometimes among elder generations of Ashkenazi Jews to see our experiences through the lens of the indigenous people of this continent, I'm aware that that is not the real story. And we have largely eventually found unprecedented refuge as Jews in a place that was opened to us by the genocide and persecution of its original inhabitants. Secondly, I live myself on a 3-acre homestead in Deerfield, a beautiful piece of land as full of life as I can make it, where I grow food for my family, including the Three Sisters crops. We grow indigenous beans, we grow Abenaki corn, we grow squash. And it's only when I take the time to think about it that I remember that this is the land of the Potomac people. And finally, my daughter, who I'm holding in my arms as she sleeps, comes to me from the Tono O'odham people of the Southwest. And though everything was done absolutely appropriately, it was an adoption process initiated by her birth mother, approved by the courts set up by the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I'm actively engaged myself in learning the O'odham language so I can bring her up both in her indigenous and her Jewish heritages. I am acutely conscious of the legacy of babies being removed from indigenous families and the socioeconomic underpinnings that determines who adopts and who gives up children to adoption. So where does this leave me? Modeh Ani. It leaves me with acknowledgement, and it leaves me with gratitude, with thanks. I am grateful that my family and my people found refuge from genocide and dispossession. And I acknowledge that it was at the expense of the genocide and dispossession of other peoples. I am grateful for the land that sustains my body and spirit and provides food for my family. And I acknowledge that I bought it, as they say, off the back of the truck, as you say about goods that have been stolen from somebody else and then sold to you. I am grateful for a daughter who I love as my body and my soul. And I acknowledge that in the most just of all worlds, she might not be mine. Modeh Ani lefanecha. I acknowledge and give thanks before you. And thank you for the trust and the faithfulness for allowing me to walk into this new day.
Thank you so much for your beautiful words of acknowledgement and gratitude. It's just beautiful. Thank you. Next, I am delighted to introduce Dr. Muhammad Salim Bajwa, who is one of the founders of the Islamic Society of Western Massachusetts. Dr. Bajwa, would you please begin our closing prayer? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I bring greetings of peace for all of you from the Islamic Society of Western Mass. I start my reflection with the recitation of a few verses from our holy book, Quran, where our Lord, the Creator, says, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Inna Allaha alimun khabir. O people, we have created you from male and a female, from a single male and a female, and made you races and tribes that you may know one another. But the best among you in the sight of God is the one who is the most righteous. And God also says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. We have honored all the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea and provided them with good things and greatly favored them over many of those that we have created. So from our scripture, we know that all human beings, all we as humans are from the same father and mother, Adam and Eve. And all humans are honored by God, our Creator. God has endowed us all with divine image and qualities of love, compassion, mercy, and justice. In the eyes of the God, we are all equal. Of course, those qualities of love, compassion, mercy, and justice, it's up to us all, how much we use and how much we abuse. The only criteria of being superior or more dignified is by our submission to the will and commandments of our Creator God and by excelling in performing good and virtuous deeds. Throughout the history of mankind, human beings have definitely transgressed, have committed treachery, robbing, and killing. The strong and the selfish have killed and deprived the weak of their lands and heritage. The history chapters are full of stories of savagery and slavery in the foundations of so many civilizations, including the one that we are going through. We definitely need to reflect, repent, and try to reconcile. We are all enjoined to stand for the just cause and stand with those who have been wronged and deprived of their rights and dignity. We are enjoined to cooperate with each other in doing good deeds and repelling the evil. Thus, we stand with our Native American brothers and sisters. We stand for your rights, your honor, and your deserved position in the society. With this brief reflection, I will humbly submit a prayer to Almighty God, our Creator and Lord of the universe. Ya Rab, O the Cherisher, dear God, O the Creator and Cherisher of all that is in the heavens and the earth, we humble ourselves. We submit to you and you alone and ask you alone for help. Grant us divine guidance to be your servants. May we serve you and the humanity in the best way. May we honor the diversity amongst us as your blessing, respecting and tolerating each other. May we shed away the evil of racism, hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. We have a brief prayer in Arabic. Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam. Hayyina rabbana bis salam. Tabarakta ya zul jalali wal ikram. O our Lord, O our Lord, you are peace. From you comes the peace. Make us live in peace. Blessed are you, the Most High and exalted. O our Lord, honor our native brothers and sisters and their ancestors whose spirits are scattered on the hills and in the valleys of this beautiful land, and fill their future with dignity and the due status in the society. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bajwa, for your prayers and for asking people to stand up with honor for rights and dignity of Indigenous peoples and of humankind. Thank you very much for your words. I want to say Kuyana Nagla Nagifsi. Thank you for listening. Many thanks to Interfaith Opportunities Network and their several partners that came together so that we may have our voices centered. You have my deepest gratitude and utmost respect. This has been an incredible journey in creating this event. Many thanks to our powerful speakers and incredible musicians for speaking truth, for sharing, educating, and entertaining us today. I appreciate this more than I can express in words. So many thanks to you, dear listener, for listening and being with us here today. I will never forget your kindness and willingness to listen, even when the listening may be hard. Your generous spirit to be allies and accomplices in dismantling structures of oppression is truly inspiring, and I am truly humbled to know such incredible beings of light and compassion. Kuyanak nalag nagivsi, tabatne, walawini, karaputush, walelin, nayawin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Poisoned our water without knowing what we had done. But now, somehow, the shiny plated God that we had prayed to and obeyed was melting in the sun, and we looked around, found each other. We did not see the other, only sister and brother. And we knew then we were one, protectors standing, no weapons in our hands, and with only scarred lands to hear. Somehow we sang, we live under the same sun, we drink the same water. In water we are one. We live under the same sun, we are of the water. To the water we return. Something from a long time ago, gathering of ancestors, red, white, black, yellow. down like ancient wisdom, falling from the stars, telling us a story of who and what we are. And each one held a cup, and each one held it up, and every cup was filled, and not a drop was spilled. We live under the same sun, we drink the same water, in water